I was 53 when I first noticed James, the widower who lived in the house across the lane. Our village, a quiet cluster of stone cottages cradled by rolling hills, was a place where time seemed to pause, where the seasons marked the rhythm of life with gentle certainty. My own cottage, with its sagging roof, ivy-twined walls, and garden overflowing with roses, had been my refuge since my husband's death a decade earlier. My children, now grown and scattered across cities I'd never visited, left me to my solitary routines, tending the flowers, baking bread, reading by the fire's flickering glow as the evenings stretched long and quiet. James, a retired school teacher in his late 50s, had moved in 2 years prior, his arrival a subtle shift in the village's rhythm, like a new verse in a familiar song. I knew little of him beyond his polite nods and the way he'd pause to admire my roses, his hands clasped behind his back, his gray eyes catching the light with a warmth that lingered in my mind long after he'd walked away. At first, James was merely a neighbor, a man whose life ran parallel to mine, our paths crossing in fleeting, unremarkable moments. At the market, where he'd carry a basket of apples with a careful grip, or on the lane, where he'd tip his cap as we passed, his smile brief but kind. He was tall, with a slight stoop from years of leaning over books, his hair a mix of silver and brown, his face weathered but softened by a quiet dignity. I noticed the way he moved, steady and unhurried, the way his fingers lingered on the pages of the newspaper he read on his porch, his glasses slipping slightly down his nose. These observations came unbidden, slipping into my thoughts as I weeded the garden or stirred soup on the stove, the steam curling around my hands like a secret. I dismissed them as idle musings, the product of a mind with too much time, a heart grown restless in its solitude. But they lingered, a quiet hum beneath the surface of my days, a whisper I couldn't quite silence. The feelings began to take shape one spring, when the roses bloomed in a riot of crimson, white, and blush pink, their scent heavy in the air, a fragrance that seemed to carry the weight of something unspoken. I was pruning the bushes, my hands stained with earth, my knees damp from the grass, when I felt his gaze from across the lane. James stood on his porch, a mug in hand, watching me with an intensity that made my breath catch, my heart stutter in a way it hadn't in years. I straightened, brushing a strand of hair from my face, and met his eyes for a moment that stretched, charged with something I couldn't name, something that felt both thrilling and forbidden. My pulse quickened, a warmth spreading through my chest, a sensation that had no place in a widow's heart, a mother's heart. I turned back to the roses, my fingers trembling as I gripped the shears, the thorns pricking my skin, their sharp bite a reminder of the boundaries I'd always honored. Yet, the warmth of his gaze lingered, a secret I carried into the cottage, its glow both exhilarating and shameful, a spark that refused to be extinguished. I was 55 now, my body softened by time, my face etched with lines that told of laughter, loss, and the quiet endurance of a life lived for others. My hair, once a rich auburn, was threaded with silver, falling in loose waves I no longer bothered to tame. I was no stranger to love. I'd known it with my husband, a steady, quiet thing that had anchored me through decades of marriage, children, and the small joys of a shared life. But this was different, a forbidden spark that flickered in the dark corners of my heart, a flame that burned with a heat I hadn't thought possible at this age. At night, when the cottage was still and the village slept, I'd lie awake, the moonlight spilling through the curtains, casting shadows that danced across the quilt. I'd imagine James in ways that made my pulse race, my breath catch in my throat. His hands, strong from years of turning pages and tending his own small garden, would feature in my thoughts, reaching for me, tracing lines they had no right to trace. Their touch, a forbidden promise I could only dream of. The guilt was immediate, a cold weight that pressed against my chest, a reminder of my role as a mother, a widow, a woman bound by the expectations of a village that saw me as virtuous, dependable, the keeper of a legacy of quiet duty. Yet, the guilt couldn't extinguish the thrill, the way my body came alive at the thought of him, a fire that warmed me in ways I'd forgotten, a secret that made my blood sing with a vitality I thought I'd lost. James, for his part, remained a gentleman, his interactions with me polite, measured, yet laced with a warmth that felt personal, deliberate, as if he, too, sensed the current that flowed between us. He'd stop by to borrow a tool or offer a cutting from his lavender, his visits brief but charged with an undercurrent I couldn't ignore, a tension that seemed to hum in the air. Once, as he handed me a bundle of herbs tied with twine, his fingers brushed mine, and I felt a jolt, a spark that left me dizzy, my breath shallow, as if the air had been stolen from the room. I pulled back, muttering about the roses. My face flushed as I turned away, but the memory of his touch lingered, a forbidden echo that haunted me through the day, its warmth seeping into my bones. I saw it in his eyes, too, a flicker of something unspoken, a pause that suggested he felt the same pull, the same dangerous longing, though we both hid it behind careful smiles and measured words. The seasons turned, and the tension grew, a silent thread weaving through our encounters, a delicate web I couldn't escape. I found excuses to be near him, lingering at the fence to comment on the weather, my voice too bright, or offering a jar of my rosehip jam, my hands trembling as I passed it over, the glass cool against my skin. Each moment was a dance, a careful balance of propriety and desire, a tightrope I walked with a heart that pounded too loudly, its rhythm a traitor to my resolve. I'd watch him read on his porch, his glasses slipping down his nose, his brow furrowed in concentration, and imagine sitting beside him, my hand resting on his, our silence a language of its own, a conversation we could never have. The thought was a betrayal, not of my late husband, whose memory had softened into a gentle ache, but of the life I'd built, the woman I was expected to be, a pillar of the village, a mother whose love was selfless, unwavering. Yet the thrill of it was undeniable, a secret that set my blood alight, my body humming with a vitality that felt both new and ancient, a desire that whispered of a life I might have lived. One summer evening, the village held its annual festival, the square alive with music, lanterns, and the scent of freshly baked bread. I went alone, my children too far to join me, their lives tethered to distant cities. I found James there, standing by the edge of the crowd, his hands in his pockets, his silhouette framed by the golden glow of the lights. The sight of him stirred something deep within me, a longing so fierce it left me breathless, my heart a wild thing I couldn't tame. We stood together, watching the dancers swirl across the square, the air heavy with the scent of honeysuckle and the weight of our unspoken thoughts. As the music swelled, a slow, haunting melody that seemed to echo the ache in my chest. Our shoulders brushed, and I felt the heat of him, the solid presence that drew me like a tide, pulling me toward a shore I could never reach. My pulse raced, a thrill that bordered on pain, and when I glanced at him, his eyes were on me, dark and steady, holding a question I couldn't answer, a depth that threatened to unravel me. I turned away, my face burning, and excused myself to fetch a drink, my steps unsteady as I fled the intensity of that moment, the air too thick with what we wouldn't say. The encounter left me shaken, the ember in my heart now a flame I could barely contain, its heat both a comfort and a torment. I avoided James for days, keeping to my garden, my hands busy with weeding and pruning, the roses a riot of color that mocked the chaos within me. But the thoughts persisted, creeping into every quiet moment. His eyes, his hands, the way he'd stood so close at the festival, as if the world had narrowed to the space between us. At night, I'd imagine him crossing the lane, knocking on my door, his presence filling the cottage with a warmth I hadn't known in years, his touch, a confession we could never make. The images were vivid, searing, and I'd wake with my heart pounding, my body alive with a desire that both thrilled and tormented me, a fire that burned brighter with each passing day. I prayed for release, my whispers lost in the quiet of the church, its stone walls cool against my bowed head. But the flame burned on, fed by the mere thought of him, by the forbidden allure of a connection that defied the roles we played, the lives we'd chosen. Autumn brought a new distance, as if James sensed the danger too, the precipice we teetered on. His visits grew rarer, his nods more formal, yet the tension remained, a silent current that flowed beneath our brief exchanges, a spark that refused to die. Once, as I returned from the market, my basket heavy with apples and bread, he offered to carry it, his voice low, his eyes avoiding mine. Our hands brushed as he took the basket, the touch fleeting but electric, sending a shiver through me, a spark that left me trembling. As I walked home, my thoughts a tangle of guilt and desire. I saw it in his posture, the way he hesitated before leaving, as if he too felt the pull, the weight of what we couldn't say, the longing that lived in the spaces between us. Winter came, and with it, a stillness that mirrored the quiet resolve I tried to cultivate. I threw myself into my routines, knitting scarves for the church bazaar, baking pies for the neighbors, tending the garden, even as the roses slept beneath a blanket of frost. But the thoughts of James persisted, creeping into the quiet moments, their warmth a contrast to the cold that seeped through the cottage's walls. I'd see him shoveling snow from his path, his breath clouding in the air, and feel a pang of longing, a thrill that made my hands tremble as I gripped my mug of tea. I wondered if he felt it too. If he lay awake at night, his heart stirred by the same forbidden fire, his mind haunted by the same impossible dreams. Years passed, and I grew older, my body softening further, my hair now fully silver, its strands catching the light like the frost on the roses. At 58, I learned through the village gossip that James was moving to be closer to his son in another county, his cottage sold to a young couple with a child. The news struck me like a blow, a grief I had no right to claim, a loss that settled into my bones. I stood in my garden, the roses fading with the season, their petals curling inward, and felt the weight of all that had gone unsaid, all that could never be. The day he left, I watched from my window as he loaded his car, his movements slow, deliberate, his silhouette a familiar shape against the gray sky. For a moment, he paused, looking toward at my cottage, and I wondered if he saw me, if he felt the same ache, the same regret for a path we'd never dared to take. I stayed hidden, my heart a storm of longing and sorrow, and let him go. The lane between us a chasm that had always been too wide, its emptiness a mirror to the void within me. At 60, I received a letter from James, forwarded by the new owners of his cottage. It was brief, a note thanking me for my kindness as a neighbor, wishing me well in the years to come. I read it in the garden, the paper trembling in my hands, the words blurring as a pang of loss pierced my chest. I pictured him in his new home, surrounded by his son's family, his days filled with a warmth I could never share, and felt a bittersweet ache, a longing laced with acceptance. I wrote back, my words careful, expressing gratitude for his friendship, but as I sealed the envelope, I allowed myself a moment of truth. I missed him, not as a neighbor, but as a man who had stirred something in me, who had seen me in a way that left me raw and alive. Now at 64, I live with the ghost of that unspoken desire, a companion as constant as the cottage itself, its walls holding the secrets I've never dared to voice, its rooms heavy with the weight of a longing that has shaped me, defined me, even as I've fought to bury it. The village is quieter without James, the lane empty where he once walked, its stones worn smooth by years of our silent dance. I tend the roses, their blooms a reminder of the moments when I felt alive, when the thrill of wanting him set my blood alight, my body humming with a desire I thought I'd left behind. In the quiet of the night, when the cottage is still and the hills beyond the village sleep, I allow myself to remember his eyes, the way they held mine in the festival's glow, seeing me not as a widow, not as a mother, but as a woman, flawed and aching, her heart laid bare in a glance that lasted a lifetime. I think of the life I might have lived, one where I crossed the lane, where I let the flame burn without shame, where I embraced the thrill of wanting and let it remake me. But the thought is fleeting, swallowed by the reality of my life, my duties, my solitude, a tapestry woven with threads of love, loss, and quiet endurance. I am a woman caught in a fire I could neither embrace nor extinguish, and the weight of that truth is a bloom I carry in secret, its petals soft against the thorns of regret. The roses will thrive long after I'm gone, their fragrance lingering in the air, their beauty a testament to a longing that was never spoken but never faded. A thrill that lived in the shadows and left me forever changed. A woman remade by the unspoken bloom that burned within her.